Can you hear me okay? My talk today is about the afterlife. And it occurs to me that that song is very relevant to the peace and the letting go that people experience when they have a near-death experience. And we do have some reports of people who have died, really died, and come back to tell someone about it. Well, not come back, but be able to communicate about it. So I'm going to talk all about that right now. Since I've been on a spiritual path, I have loved to hear other people's experiences, spiritual experiences with God. Because when you think about it, your life is fairly limited. You can only have so many experiences. But the more you can hear about other people's experiences, your life is just so enriched by hearing how other people have been blessed by God and have encountered God and have had their lives enriched by their spirituality. So a book that changed my life a long time ago was Raymond Moody's Life After Life. Anybody read it? It came out in 1975. I can't remember when I read it. I know it was sometime after that. But he interviewed people who had near-death experiences, people who were pronounced clinically dead on the operating table or through some medical emergency or something, and went on a journey to the other side. And that changed my life forever, because that was my agnostic period. And I just didn't want to hear anything about God, you know. But I read this book and I saw that people left their bodies. They separated from their bodies. They no longer had physical eyes or physical ears or physical brains. At least they were separate from the body that was down there on the table. But they could still hear, they could still see, they could still think, and they still knew it was them. They still had an identity. And that just blew me away. So this was a very groundbreaking book. What Moody communicated was that these people left their bodies. They could see their bodies being worked on. Sometimes they went through a tunnel. Sometimes they went through a life review. And if they got far enough, they encountered this being of light who was filled with love. And it felt very personal. And here's a quote from Moody. "The love and the warmth which emanate from this being to the dying person are utterly beyond words, and he feels completely surrounded by it and taken up in it, completely at ease and accepted in the presence of this being." So when people make it to the light, they feel this unutterable sense of love and acceptance. And after that book came out, it was a sensation. Lots of people started investigating near-death experiences, people who had been pronounced clinically dead, or at least were comatose, or there are different definitions of it. And Dr. Moody just kept being a pioneer. He befriended all these researchers. He helped them all that he could, and apparently they all became friends, and they wrote forwards to each other's books and stuff. And it just mushroomed this investigation of NDEs. But I was convinced. I didn't read too many of those books because I was convinced, okay, something happened. There's something beyond this, and we are able to be conscious of it. But then fairly recently, I was introduced to a book by Eben Alexander called Proof of Heaven, A Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Afterlife. This was in 2012. I just started working at Silent Unity, and someone recommended it to me. And what was supposed to be special about this book was that this guy, well, first of all, he's a neurosurgeon, and he was a skeptical scientific doctor, the kind who usually just sort of pat you on the head and say, that couldn't have happened. You know, that's a nice fantasy, but that's impossible. But it happened to him. And what made his case interesting also was that his neocortex, because he had some kind of meningitis, his neocortex was completely wiped out. It was a miracle he lived, really a true miracle. So the part that was supposed to be able to have hallucinations, didn't exist during his near-death experience. So there's always someone who comes forward and says, no, this is impossible, and here's what really happened. It's the drugs, it's this, it's that, it's the hallucination of a dying brain. That's one thing I really discovered while researching this is, if you don't want to believe something, you just don't believe it. You just find all kind of reasons not to believe it. And it seems like in order to really believe something, you have the experience. I bet every one of you has had some kind of experience with God. That's why you believe in God. Some kind of experience, because that's what convinces us more than anything, I think, is our own experience or our vicarious experience through people that we believe. So we can choose to believe these people or not. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of these reports. It's estimated that 770 some people have an NDE every day. So these are getting to, and apparently they're getting to be more common because the medical profession is able to resuscitate people more. So whereas people would have gone on and not come back, now they can come back and tell about it. And then another book I read about that time was this book, The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. How My Bad Boy Brother Proved to Me There's Life After Death. I really, really recommend this book. I just love this book. This guy died, and he was very, very close with his sister, who was a writer and a musician. And for some reason, he was able to communicate with her. She was able to hear him. So he communicated with her from the other side, and he kept her updated on what was happening to him as he went on his journey on the other side. It's just fascinating. And it also talks about her journey of trying to figure out, is this true? Could this be true? I can't tell anybody about this. They'll think I'm crazy and all this kind of stuff. It's a really good book, I think. And then, also when I was researching this, I found there are organizations that research NDEs, and there's a website called NDEFS. It's Dr. Jeffrey Long. He has 4,000. He has all his data right there online. He has data on 4,000 NDEs, and you can just read it. You can read the story. You can see how they answered all of his questions. He has like 120 questions. He asked them all. Fascinating stuff. I'm going to share a little bit about that. So basically what I want to share with you is some of the inspiration I've gained from investigating this just in the last week when I've been working on this talk. The main thing that that's very inspiring to me is the love, the indescribable, unconditional love they felt from this supreme being. And, you know, I think we kind of all, oh yeah, God is love, God is love. We believe that. And yeah, maybe God doesn't judge. In unity, we tend to believe that. But this is just so incredibly off the chart what they say about divine love. People who have had these experiences. And also, the lack of judgment and how they perceive their lives, like, no matter how I screwed up, it was all okay. Now, I don't know about you, but I do not want to die or have a near-death experience in order to believe in that unconditional love or to believe that God doesn't judge me. So I choose to believe these guys. I choose to have my vicarious experience through them. So let me tell you a little bit about Billy. His real name is William Cohen. I was fascinated by his story, particularly because he was a screw-up. He was a drug addict. He was kind of a charming con man. He sold drugs to support his habit, and he was in jail different times. But at his core, he had a deep yearning for God. And when he crossed over, when that car hit him, he went for it. He went straight for God. And he went through this kind of cosmic birthing canal, he said, that delivered him into his new life. And he came out of that birthing canal into this glorious universe full of stars. And his father did greet him, but And no one else greeted him, and I was wondering about that. He was off there in space, communing with the universe, all by himself, it seemed like, except that he could feel beings going by. He felt the divine presence around him, but nobody really talked to him for a long time. And that was his unique, I learned later in the book, that was his unique perspective. And then while he was drifting through the universe, this hologram surrounded him, this beautiful hologram, all around him, 360 degrees, and he could see his life. Without judgment, he could look at his life, and he could see not only what he did, the choices he made, but the choices he didn't make, the choices he could have made, and he got to see how those choices would have worked out. And he just looked at it all without judgment, and he realized that no matter what choices he made, it would have all been all right. Now, to me, that's a huge revelation, because I'm one of those people who worries about making the right decision. Anybody else? You know, like you can make, you know, we have this strong belief that you can be wrong, you can make wrong decisions, you can screw up. But he's saying once you get on the other side, he at least had a very different perspective. But that was very comforting to me. And then he talks about what it's like. After his life review, he says he gives some other lessons in the book about how we can view our life. Here's a quote: "We're meant to engage in all kinds of things on earth, things that don't make sense from a human point of view. So take a moment before you judge your fellow man too harshly." He says, a lot of people judged me, but I was dealing with circumstances I had signed up to explore before I was born. So there was a lot of that in there about we make, and the NDEs as well, we choose this. We choose the experiences we want to have because we thought it would be interesting and fun. He says it's more a kind of experiment chosen for the soul. It's a kind of experiment chosen for soul-type reasons that humans have an almost impossible time understanding. Can I get an amen? And not understanding is an important part of the experiment. He talks about when you're born, you go into amnesia. Before you're born, you know you're a divine being and you know you're a soul. And then when you're born, bang, amnesia. He says if people knew the workings of the experiment, it would lose some of its punch. And that losing of punch, well, that's a little bit of what enlightenment is all about. So we have the amnesia on purpose so that we can experience this as though it were real, and then go back to try to find our way back to where we came from, our knowing ourselves as spiritual beings. Talks a lot about self-love, about just don't waste your time on planet Earth without loving yourself, because that's what it's all about. And just, I kept wondering, why is he out there all alone in space? Because the NDEs I'd read about, all your friends come to meet you, and all these beings come and tell you stuff. But he was a very special case because there was no one he particularly wanted to meet, and he just wanted to go straight for God, so that's what he did. But he says most people go to this place called Superworld, where they meet people, their loved ones. But he also says you can meet your loved ones anytime, because on the other side you can be more than one place at once. It's like when he was talking to his sister, he was able to communicate with her, but he was really off light years away in another part of his being. So the super world is where you learn to let go of your fears and your beliefs. He says beliefs are like toys. We have a lot of fun playing with our beliefs, but eventually we get tired of it. And then he says eventually people leave the super world, and they either they go on to watch their life review, and then some of them go back to Earth if they want to do that, or some go on to other worlds. And that's what he did. wasn't interested in going back to Earth right away. And he went on to other worlds, and what he did was he had an experience of becoming one with the universe. He was floating out there in space, feeling his oneness with the universe. So that was really cool to read about. And he says, I was an incurable drug addict who wasn't even capable of making a living. Who would have thought that I would be ready for becoming the universe? Well, that just shows you can never judge anyone's life, yours included. Because apparently a lot of people have to prepare a lot before they can have that experience of feeling one with the universe. And his sister's name is Annie. He says to her, believe me, Annie, everything you ever need is already inside you. And who you really are is far beyond your comprehension. And that's why living squeezed into the human experience can be painful at times. It was for me. So, Billy went on to have more and more experiences that he kept telling his sister about. Like he met his ex-wife, Soul, passing along, and he was just awestruck by her beauty. And he said, there's a good reason we can't see each other's souls in this life, because we never get anything done. He just was staring in awe at her soul and how beautiful she was. So I thought that was interesting. So he goes through a lot more experiences. I really recommend you read the book. He got a body of light eventually. He got guides eventually. Eventually he met up with his soul group. And eventually he went off into higher worlds and he stopped communicating with his sister. That's the end of the book. Although I did sign up for her website to see if there are any reports since this book came out, see if there's any new information. So basically, that's one person's experience. And what the near-death researchers say is that every near-death experience is different because well, they don't say why, they just say it's different, but I think it's because it's a spiritual experience. Each person is supposed to have their own experience, and they need to have a certain experience. So, for example, another book that I recommend is Eben Alexander's Proof of Heaven. I told you about that. The neurosurgeon who didn't believe in any of this stuff, and then he came back. His whole life now is telling people about the afterlife and the experience he had, and he's researched it much more since then. So I'm very interested in the people who did not believe before, had this experience, this divine encounter, and now they're true believers. They totally believe in God. They totally believe in life after death. And no one can convince them otherwise because they had the experience. But I also want to say that there's the naysayers, the people who don't want to believe any of it, also tend to bring up, there's also a phenomenon of people having a negative experience in their near-death experience. And I was kind of concerned about that. It's like, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear there was any hell or anything like that. But it turns out it's all what we believe. I mean, that beings tell them there's no hell. But the people who experience a negative experience typically believed in hell or had some kind of dark aspect of their personality that they were unwilling to deal with. So when they had this experience where they got to face their own darkness. And sometimes it was kind of a hellish looking experience, like people with jackal faces and people in torment and all this kind of stuff. And there are people who have specifically studied these negative experiences. And I was very, very relieved to find out that universally, almost universally, it turned out to be a good experience. That these people had this experience and it turned their life around. They needed a wake-up call. They needed to be scared straight. Scared. It used to be, prisoners used to bring these kids in and tell them all the terrible things about prison and stuff, and with love, and they call it scared straight. it's kind of the same thing. You have this near-death experience where you get to see your own darkness and it wakes you up. So I was really relieved to find out about that. But then also, there's the whole issue of people trying to attack these people, especially the famous ones. Like Eben Alexander got a lot of attacks because he was, first of all, his book was a bestseller, and he was a neurosurgeon, and so everybody was making a big deal out of his case being real proof for life after death. And so, of course, people who couldn't accept that had to try to debunk him. And so they tried to question his veracity. They called him a liar. They said he was a failure as a neurosurgeon. They said all this kind of stuff. They questioned the details of his near-death experience. And that kind of stuff is upsetting to me. But usually there's someone who steps up. Like I went to one of the websites that talks about near-death, and they went through that article. There was an article in Esquire attacking him. And they went through it piece by piece and showed that this journalist who wrote the story was completely biased, and he didn't bother to examine the evidence that he could have examined. So once again, we all have to decide what we believe is true and what we're going to take into our lives as something meaningful to us. And there are always going to be people who are not going to believe anything until they've had the experience. Like there's this guy, Michael Shermer. Do you know who that is? He's like a professional skeptic. Anytime anybody paranormal is on TV or anything, to balance it out, they bring in this guy who believes in nothing paranormal. And he actually, I saw him, I watched a YouTube video of him, and it was really kind of sad because I'd like to believe in this stuff. I really wish I could, but it's just not true. And so I'm kind of praying for this guy to have some kind of an experience of God. Of course, I don't want to wish that he dies or, has a heart attack or anything, but still, it would be nice. I wish for this guy that he could have some experience of God, And that's kind of something that we can do too. We don't have to die to have these experiences. There are lots of ways to have transcendent experiences. We can meditate. That's the first place to start. We can just ask God, show yourself to me. There's a scientist called Gary Schwartz who did at Arizona State who does studies of mediums, people who claim to communicate with people after they die. It's very scientific research, and he's found that a lot of them are really quite accurate, and the people really were like they say. And but he was one of these people who didn't believe in any of this stuff. And he asked God. He said to God, if you're real, show me. Give me some kind of a sign. And it's been so long ago since I read this, I can't remember exactly what God did. But he felt this presence. He felt this overwhelming love and peace or something. He got his answer, and I thought that was really cool. So maybe all you have to do is ask if you want to have an experience of God. So, I like to read this stuff. It makes me feel good. It makes me know that these people are coming back to talk about this so that people who are in doubt, who do feel lost, can have some means for believing when maybe they didn't before. We always have the choice whether to believe it or not, but I like the idea that there are inspiring stories and accounts out there that can comfort and bless us. So if you're interested in any of this, there's tons of information out there. And I had a good time just going to that website where they have the 4,000 cases, and you just click on them. Like the first one I clicked on, well, I don't have time to talk about it, but anyway. Just quickly. This lady, she believed in heaven and hell and all that kind of stuff. And when she got there, she was scooped up by this angel, and they sat her down and they said, all these people are lined up to honor you and welcome you. And in the line, she thought she spotted Jesus. And it just freaked her out because she thought, I'm afraid if I think Jesus would honor me that I'll be damned to hell. And this angel said, well, first of all, there is no hell. But in spirit, we're all equal. We're all one. We're all part of God. So that was a cool one right off. That was the first one I looked at. But they're very, very different. Lots of people don't even get to the light. They just hang around to the hospital for a while, observing what goes on and hearing the doctors talk about them. Fascinating subject. Anyway, so let's just take a minute now to go within. And we do. Let's just close our eyes and know that God, well, I'm sure everybody in this room believes that God is real. God is real, and God is always revealing itself to us. And so let's just declare our willingness to be open to a knowing and understanding of God's presence in our lives, however that works out for us. We can do that anytime. We can do it right now. Let's just take a moment in the silence to know that the presence of God is always with us. Thank you, God, for life, for this human life. Where we get to experience things we could never experience in that pure bliss that people talk about on the other side. We get to experience contrast. We get to experience separation. We get to experience pain, and we give thanks for it all. We give thanks for all the choices we've made in our lives. And let's just entertain the possibility that it's all for good. That it all leads to good, that we're going to go back to that place of bliss that we came from, and with a heightened perception and an appreciation for it. Thank you, God, for life. Thank you, God, for life in all its many forms. Amen.